Pleasure now to call on the next speaker for the oral presentation, and that is Dr. Marissa Ceresnie. And the talk is going to be on investigating disparities in recording race and ethnicity in vitiligo, clinical trial screening assessments. I think that sounds really interesting, and I would really look forward to hearing that. Over to you, Dr. Marissa.
Hi, I'm Dr. Marissa Ceresnie, a clinical research fellow at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, Michigan. I'd like to share with you today our research on investigating the disparities in recording race and ethnicity in vitiligo clinical trial screening assessments. These are my disclosures. Some background information on this topic is that all federally sponsored clinical trials require race and ethnicity collection from our subjects. At minimum, this must be within 5 race categories and 2 ethnicity categories. In 2016, the Federal Office of Management and Budget released that the categories are not scientific, but rather sociocultural. However, these categories are being used scientifically as they determine safety and effectiveness of therapy and determination of dose and dose intervals. In fact, 1/5 of new drugs approved by the FDA between 2008 and 2013 showed some differences across racial and ethnic groups. This poses a potential issue because each category contains a diverse group of different populations. Each population has a unique burden of disease, culture, social norms, environmental exposures, genetics, metabolisms, among many other things. All of these factors can contribute to interpretation of disease distribution and risk factors. Some implications for vitiligo clinical trials include misrepresentation of participation and misclassification of treatment outcomes. These are the race and ethnicity definitions, last revised in 1997, that we are still using today. These categories labels are not very inclusive, and many people do not identify with these terms. For example, in the white category, not only does it include Europeans, but also Middle Easterns and North Africans. In the Asian category, it includes those of the Far East and Southeast Asia and those of the Indian subcontinent. In the American Indian or Alaska Native category, it's not only North Americans, but also South Americans and Central Americans are included as well. Another point of confusion is the ethnicity of Hispanic or Latino and their race identification. While this ethnicity can include any Spanish culture or origin, many of this group do not identify with a specific race. As in the 2020 census, 31% of people who identified with this ethnicity selected the other category, in comparison to 9.4% of the total US population who selected other. To identify this further, we did a retrospective chart review of the last 10 years of industry-initiated clinical trials that occurred at Henry Ford Hospital. We identified 34 subjects. These are our results. In the pink circle, that represents our 15 subjects who identified as white. Within this category, 4 of those subjects also identified as Middle Eastern. Our other person who identified as Middle Eastern selected the unknown not reported category. The other 2 in that category identified as Hispanic or Latino. On the left, in our gray circles, represents our Asian populations. There were 4 Asians in our total group, and 1 identified as South Asian and 1 as Southeast Asian. There were 2 that did not specify. In addition, we had 11 Black or African American subjects and 1 subject who identified as American Indian or Alaska Native. In conclusion, there are potential inconsistencies in reporting race and ethnicity in vitiligo industry and clinical trials. This is especially prevalent in our Middle Eastern populations, South and Southeast Asian Asians, Hispanic and Latino groups as well. This leads to possible misclassification by subjects, and this affects the generalizability of our results. Some recommendations for future studies is to continue to advocate for better organization of race and ethnic groups in our trials. Some possibilities of this is a clear definition of the different regions, maybe a graphic map, listing of all possible choices, or fill in the blank. Thank you for your time. Questions are welcome live or by email.
So Marissa, thank you very much, for that presentation. I think it was something different and little out of the box, We normally don't think of doing that kind of a study. And I'd like to invite any questions, if there are, I don't see any in the chat box, anybody who would like to ask anything, about it. And I think you're from Switzerland?
I'm from Detroit, Michigan in the United States.
Yeah, sorry, you're from Michigan. So I'd just like to ask you, and also you see in Michigan, is it all a mixed ethnicity that you're seeing, or are you seeing more of any particular type of ethnicities?
We're lucky to have a very diverse population here in Detroit. And in fact, within our studies, our populations did match those from the 2020 census in Wayne County, which is our specific area that we are located.
Yeah, I think if you had to just tell, the audience that is there in one, line that, what is, because, although we hear the words race and ethnicity, but to be very frank, when we have to use it in practice, it looks like one and the same. How would you just say in one line that how are they different from each other, the race and the ethnicity?
It is something that is unique. The United States uses very frequently, and it is a very fine line. I would say race, oftentimes it's used to label more of a geographic origin. And also there's some overtones with that too that come into play. And then ethnicity, I see as more of a cultural identity. However, the federal government really just breaks it down on recording as, assessments as Hispanic or Latino or not. But when you ask the average person, a lot of people break it down even further than that.
Yeah, I think you put it down well. It's not easy to explain, but as you've rightly said, race would be more historical actually, maybe the origin, so. And ethnicity, of course, you said has a cultural, tone to it. So with that, maybe we'll get back to you again, maybe at the end of the session, if there are any questions. Sometimes they come a little later. But meanwhile, thank you for your presentation. We'll be returning back to you